Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to touch briefly on a few topics and talk a bit about approved auditors, limited recourse borrowing arrangements and property, and our compliance focus this year. But first, I'm going to start by noting that the effective regulation and willing compliance in the SMSF sector, as for anywhere else, is all about how well we all respond to the challenges that are around us and adapt to change. For all of us, the ability to seize the opportunities that are around and to grow and to prosper is a direct result of how well we manage our taxation and compliance environment. Now, the Australian superannuation system seems to be doing pretty well at this. As said in a recent article in Money Management, Australia has continued to rank third in the world for the overall quality, adequacy and sustainability of its superannuation system, with the stronger super reforms improving its performance in the 2013 Melbourne Mercer Global Pension Index. The introduction of the stronger regulatory requirements around superannuation lifted the nation's overall score, as said, taking us to round third. And our stats show continuing growth in SMSFs. During the past 4 years, the number of SMSFs has grown rapidly. As at the end of June 2013, there were just over about 509,000 funds, which was an increase of around 40,000 funds in 1 year alone. And the assets under management have also grown, and they're now approximately $506 billion. And that's holding steady at about a third of the overall $1.6 trillion in assets held in Australian superannuation. And the return on SMSF assets in 2011 was 7.7%, which is almost the same as the 7.8% return for APRA-regulated funds. So that's a sector in fairly good shape from the stats. But a key part of having the sector stay in pretty good shape is the SMSF compliance environment and how well it's managed. And a key element of that is the annual audit of each fund by an independent approved auditor. Now, one of the main changes which is affecting SMSFs this year is that from 1 July, auditors have had to be registered with ASIC to undertake an SMSF audit. From now on, when an SMSF annual return is lodged with the ATO, we'll check that the return has an SMSF auditor number, which is called a SAN, and that the number has been registered with ASIC. If there is no SAN on the return, or if it's not recognised as a registered number, we won't accept lodgement of the return. The treatment of approved auditors found to be failing their obligations has also changed. We don't disqualify approved auditors and refer them to their professional association anymore. Instead, we now refer them to ASIC for possible enforcement action. Since 2006, overall auditor numbers have declined, and the average number of audits undertaken by auditors has increased. This is significant, as our reviews have found that smaller scale, less experienced auditors are more likely to fail to meet their obligations. It's not a surprise. If you're only doing 3 of them a year, you don't learn how to do, you might not be keeping up to date with everything you need to know. Whereas if you're doing 20 or more, well then you are. So auditor numbers have also dropped further with that requirement to register with ASIC. We also all want approved SMS auditors to understand their obligations and the issues they need to consider when auditing an SMSF. And we assist with this by providing some specialist support products. Now, one of them is our free electronic superannuation audit tool called ESAT, which is now a primary source of assistance for many auditors. You can download it from our website for free. Now, using ESAT, you can electronically lodge auditor contravention reports directly with us. It also helps ensure auditors consider all relevant matters and contains an extensive reference section. If you're an auditor, I commend it to you. If you haven't seen it, go take a look. Now, we've found that auditors who use ESAT are more likely to consider all of the relevant aspects of an audit and to report correctly. Our latest auditor contravention report data indicates that for the last quarter, for the first time, 50% of audit contravention reports were lodged using ESAT, which is more than the paper of our portals combined. Moving on to limited recourse borrowing arrangements. These continue to attract considerable interest, and we're working closely with the SMSF sector to ensure that the arrangements into which SMSFs enter comply with the law. I strongly encourage you to familiarise yourself with our Taxpayer Alert 2012/7, which warns SMSF trustees and advisors to exercise care with these arrangements and the use of related unit trusts. I also encourage you to check the rules as a first step in considering acquiring an asset under one of these arrangements, because it has to be set up absolutely correctly to be legal. Don't wait to check the rules until after you've bought the asset. It can be too late then. You might not be able to transfer it into your SMSF properly. And while I'm on the subject, the related hot issue is buying property through an SMSF. All I'm going to say on that subject is to repeat, ensure you set up the arrangements correctly and be cautious. Watch out for the property spruikers. Take the time to make sure the property is the right investment for your fund. Make sure it fits with your existing investment strategy, and if it doesn't, take the time to revisit your investment strategy properly before deciding whether to buy the property. Don't get caught up in the moment. The other thing to note with that, get a second opinion if you're not sure. I'll just mention a few things around our compliance activities this year. While we think the SMSF sector is in a pretty good shape overall, there's always a few issues of concern. Now, none of them are new. So the things that we worry about. We worry about trustees or SMSF professionals who fail to understand their obligations. We worry about trustees who fail to comply with their obligations, including lodging their annual return. We worry about approved SMS auditors who don't audit funds properly or don't report contraventions to us. And we worry about SMSFs being established for illegal early release, or the money in the fund being accessed early before a condition of release is met, or the SMSF being used for tax avoidance. Again, I repeat, we think the majority of people willingly meet their obligations and won't ever hear from us. So we concentrate on those who don't comply, whether deliberately or in error. And to the extent that we can, within the limits of the law, we respond differently to non-compliance depending on what rules have been breached and the behaviours we see. So what are we actually doing about those worries this year? Well, this year we plan to review around 1,100 SMSFs for their income tax obligations. We'll look at the regulatory obligations of around 15,000 SMSFs. That adds up to around 16,000 SMSFs, or as reported, as Tony mentioned, about 1 in 30 funds. Now that's not an audit for 1 in 30 funds, that's us reviewing about 1 in 30 funds. It might be something as simple as a phone call to see if the fund has rectified a contravention reported to us. And we're also going to review around 160 auditors. Now, more specifically, what we're doing, we're engaging with new trustees to ensure they can operate their SMSF and are not seeking illegal early access to their retirement benefits. We're focusing on ensuring annual returns are lodged and lodged on time. We're focusing on whether new funds are entitled to receive their notice of compliance. We're reviewing irregularities in exempt current pension income and non-arm's length transactions. And we're paying attention to the re-reporting of contributions in compliance with excess contributions tax release authorities. We're also going to scrutinise every fund that's reported to us by an approved SMSF auditor. We want to make sure that those trustees are more fully aware of their obligations and ensure that contraventions are dealt with. But further, regardless of why we review an SMSF, for example, something reported to us in a contravention report, we are going to look at them from a whole client perspective. So we'll look at everything to do with them. We'll also note that we're all fortunate that every fund must be independently audited annually for regulatory compliance, and that reportable contraventions must be reported to us. This independent audit is a critical factor in the ongoing concessional tax treatment of SMSFs, satisfying the government and the community that SMSFs are meeting their obligations. These audits also inform the ATO about SMSFs at risk and allow us to get in the front foot in engaging with them. As I noted earlier, in the main, we think trustees are attempting to comply with their obligations and are doing so successfully. But we do find worrying numbers of trustees who have little or no idea about their obligations and who, wrongly, abrogate all of their responsibility to their tax agent or accountant. I just want to emphasise that no matter the quality of the advisor or tax agent, trustees need to recognise that they themselves are the ones who are accountable for their fund. We also see reasonable numbers of trustees who don't fully understand aspects of their obligations, and this has led to them reporting incorrectly on their SMSF annual return or having a contravention reported to us. We also see smaller numbers of funds or trustees who are taking inappropriate actions without any attempt to comply with, or from our perspective worse, intending not to comply. Now obviously these are the cases where we take the firmest action. I mentioned earlier that one of the things we are looking at this year is lodgement of annual returns. From our perspective, one of the key trustee obligations that we're concerned about is lodgement of the SMSF annual return, because it reports on the fund's regulatory and income tax obligations. Timely lodgement indicates how well a fund is run. In order to lodge the annual return, the fund has to have been audited. If it hasn't been, we begin to wonder why. And if a fund can't manage its annual return, we begin to wonder what else it's failing to do. So we're getting tougher with poor lodgers. All SMSFs which have 2 years or more of overdue lodgements will have their regulation details removed from super fund lookup. APRA funds generally won't allow rollover of benefits to an SMSF if its regulation details have been removed from that register. Some employers also check super fund lookup before they will make a contribution to a fund. So we'll keep the regulation details off super fund lookup until an SMSF's lodgements are up to date, and that will potentially affect rollovers and employer contributions. We're also tightening up our processes that allow for a return not necessary. So we limit those to the first income year of an SMSF's existence only. If an SMSF hasn't lodged in its first year and doesn't need to lodge in its second year, this indicates that there may not even be an SMSF operating. We will cancel their registration if they haven't started operations. So, I started by saying that the Australian super system seems to be doing pretty well in responding to the challenges and adapting to continue as it grows. Part of our work as the regulator in this is about mitigating risks to the administration of the system, and our priority is to support and protect people by dealing with those who are unwilling to comply. However, the super system does affect the majority of individuals and businesses in Australia and is essential to the welfare of current and future generations. So we all need to work together to ensure its integrity. And I thank the Institute and its members for playing their part in this. Thank you.